Welcome back, guys. Lonestar Patriot here. Thanks for joining me. So the next video up in our Aero Precision build series is going to be the installation of both a pistol grip as well as a buttstock. Now for both products, I'll be using a Bravo Company manufacturing or BCM product. So for the pistol grip, I'll use the BCM Gunfighter Mod 3 grip. And for the buttstock, I'll be using the BCM Gunfighter Mod 0 SOPMOD stock. So let's jump inside and we'll get started. Okay, so to get started, I first want to start with the installation of the BCM Gunfighter Grip Mod 3. Now, obviously I'm installing this on a brand new lower receiver. However, if you are, say, replacing an existing grip to utilize this particular grip, you want to be sure that you retain your safety selector, your selector detent, as well as your selector detent spring for the installation of your replacement grip. Now, what comes with this grip is a grip screw. It also includes a star-shaped washer. And then I also recommend applying some thread locker to the grip screw. So what I'll be using, this is a Loctite. It's a blue 242 thread locker. Now to get started, we first take our safety selector and insert this into the lower receiver. Now it doesn't make any difference for the orientation of your safety selector into the lower receiver. So it can be, say, in the safe position or even in the fire position. Again, it makes no difference. Now what I want to do is actually pause it here and zoom in to show you some close-ups for the rest of the installation of the selector detent as well as selector detent spring. Okay, so the next step is insert the selector detent into the lower receiver. Now what I've done is actually flip the lower receiver upside down as well as rotate it 180 degrees so that I have my safety selector facing towards me. Now I want to insert my selector detent into this hole here in the lower receiver. Now one thing to note is that you want to be sure that the selector detent goes in with the pointed tip in first. So if I insert that in, and then what I like to do is just take a punch and be sure that it's seated to where I know that it's engaged with the safety selector. Okay, so the next step is going to be to insert the safety selector detent spring into your grip and then slide the grip onto the lower receiver. Now what I've done with the lower receiver is actually flipped it on its side. And you want to be sure, again, that your safety selector is still in place as well as your selector detent. Now, I'll take this spring and you want to insert it into this particular hole on your grip. And then the reason why I like to have the lower receiver on its side is that way I'm not fighting gravity and I can utilize the bench to keep my safety selector in place as well as watching my selector detent from coming out as I try to work the grip onto the actual lower receiver. So you want to just start slow and be sure that your grip slides over the lower receiver. Now this particular grip is a very tight fit, which I definitely like. So you want to be sure that you go slow and not jam this spring. So as I work this on to the lower receiver, I want to be sure that my selector detent spring remains aligned to where it doesn't get bound up. And you want to be sure that aligns with, of course, your selector detent into the lower receiver. And then once you're comfortable with it, you just want to continue to push this forward and seat the grip against your lower receiver. Just like that. Now before we install the grip screw, what we can quickly do is do a function check to be sure that the safety selector positively engages between both the safe and the fire modes. So as you can see here, and also as you can hear, we do have this working properly. Okay, so the last step is to install our grip screw, of course, into the hollow cavity of the grip and into the lower receiver to seat the grip onto the lower receiver. Now I've gone ahead and applied the Loctite to the grip screw, and given that this particular grip screw is slotted, I've got a number 10 of course, flathead screwdriver to utilize for the grip screw. Now, as you insert this into your grip, you want to be sure that the threads of the screw align correctly. And then as you tighten this down, you don't want to over tighten this screw, but just be sure that it snugs up against the lower receiver. Okay, so that completes the installation of the grip. Now all we need to do, of course, is just close this trapdoor on the bottom and just do one final check again to be sure that our safety selector functions as it should, which it does. So now we can move on to the installation of the buttstock. Okay, so moving on to the installation of the stock. Now this particular stock that I'll be installing is the BCM Gunfighter stock Mod 0 SOPMOD version. Now the SOPMOD actually refers to the larger surface area here on the cheek weld over, say, a traditional A2 style buttstock, and I'm certainly a fan of this particular profile. Now another thing to mention is that this stock is sized specifically for a mil-spec extension tube, which I have here installed on the lower receiver. Now for example, if you're replacing an existing stock to install this stock, you want to be sure and verify that your extension tube is not a commercially sized extension tube, as this stock will not fit. So if that's the case, you'll have to replace your extension tube with a mil-spec version. Now to get started, the first thing I want to do is actually slide this buttstock onto the extension tube, and you want to push the buttstock to where it seats against the end of that extension tube with the index pin. And then from there, what you want to do next is take, say, this is a 5/32 punch, although you can use anything with the same diameter, but you want to find something that matches the diameter, as when we press the lever, you actually have to align the holes to insert, say, this punch through to move forward in the installation. So what I'm going to do is depress that lever, and then you want to be sure that you align the holes, and this will be obvious up close as you install this, but depress the lever enough to slide, say, your punch through, and then it should protrude out the opposite side of your stock. Okay, so with the lower receiver mounted in the vise block and the vise block mounted in a bench vise, you can now get a better view of this particular punch protruding through the other side of the buttstock. Now the importance of having a punch or a similar type of object that matches as close to diameter as possible as the holes. Again, this is a 5/32 of an inch punch. It helps aid in the next step. So what we're going to do now is actually push down on this punch and move the buttstock forward onto the receiver extension tube. So pushing down on that punch and pushing from behind on the buttstock, you can slide your buttstock onto your extension tube, and then from there you can actually remove the punch, and then you can adjust your stock to where you can easily tell that it's actually seated correctly onto your extension tube. Okay, so the installation of the stock is now complete, and I've gone ahead and made the correct adjustment for me for the overall length of pull. Now, one more thing I want to point out is that this stock is essentially fully collapsible against your lower receiver. Now, I'd say you have about 1/8 of an inch gap between the stock and your castle nut, but essentially you have about as compact of a package as possible. So maybe this is of particular importance for, say, smaller frame people that might be shooting this rifle or having access to this rifle, to where the overall length of pull needs to be as short as possible. Or, for example, if you're trying to minimize the overall length of a rifle for, say, a backpack. All right, guys, so we're up to the video covering the installation of both the pistol grip as well as the buttstock. Let's first talk about the BCM Gunfighter Grip Mod 3. So what I like most about this grip? Well, there's several things. The first is going to be the ergonomics. I'm a big fan of a steeper angle grip over, say, a traditional A2 style grip, which has a much shallower angle. To me, it just has a much better feel in the hand. Now, the second thing is going to be the texture on this grip. It's got a pretty good texture. It's not overly aggressive to where it's going to rub you raw after a long time of shooting. Now, the third thing I like is going to be that it has onboard storage capacity. So while I might need to store, say, additional batteries for, say, an optic or maybe some tools for doing repairs, it's got that ability to do that. Now, keep in mind is that that storage compartment is not waterproof. Now, the only disadvantage that I see, and again, this is a personal preference, is that I typically prefer an integrated trigger guard with a pistol grip. That's why I'm a big fan of the Daniel Defense pistol grip. However, in all fairness to the Mod 3, it does have a tang or a duckbill to help bridge the gap between the grip and the trigger guard. So moving on to the buttstock. So again, it was the BCM Gunfighter Mod 0 SOPMOD stock, and really there's no disadvantages to this stock in my opinion. I'm a big fan of this stock, and there's really two primary advantages that I like about this. So the first is going to be that it has the larger cheek weld, again, the larger surface area to mount my cheek to the index well. And then the second thing is going to be the fitment against the receiver extension tube. I like a very tight fitting stock onto my receiver extension tube, especially when I index a weapon. I don't like for that to move around and make a bunch of noise and rattle. Now, overall, the installations of both of these items are very simple and straightforward, but in case you've considered installing these, hopefully you found the video helpful. But thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and keep up the good fight. What I've done, of course, is flip the upper receiver. That's a lower receiver. Now, this particular stock is geared towards a milsec. Now, one more thing to point out is that I do want to mention that this stock is essentially completely collapsible.